Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to introduce myself or to reintroduce myself to those of you who knew me before my time in Samoa. My husband Nick spoke to you a few weeks ago. You'll remember that he talked about his career in foreign affairs and the various disasters that he felt either followed him or that he was there to witness. You might worry a bit about whether I've got that same risk profile and having both of us come back into the Rotary Club. I don't know if it counts that I was in Tehran at the time of the fall of the Shah and the return of Ayatollah Khomeini. But apart from that, my life has been a little less dominated by world events than Nick seems to have been, and we've been together for about 5 years now. The end of the world's been prophesied on a number of occasions but hasn't happened yet, so I hope that we can say fingers crossed in that environment, and I hope I can contribute successfully and helpfully here in Rotary Club of Wellington. My personal background has been in government and more recently in the NGO world, and I've met quite a few of you, of the members here along the way, also as it happens Jonathan, and I really value this chance to connect with you all and to work together in service for our communities. Personally, I grew up in Christchurch. I have a Master's in English Literature from Canterbury University and then came to Wellington where I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Development Aid. With my former husband, we went to overseas postings in Tehran, in Geneva and Brussels, and then back in New Zealand in the 1990s. I spent right from then on about some 14 years in the State Services Commission. But from that point I started getting a particular interest in the not-for-profit sector. I was fortunate in having a secondment to Barnardo's as their policy director, and this kind of reinforced that interest. And then from that point on I had my eye out for possibilities, and I joined what I developed into Interpreting New Zealand. So I was the chief executive of an organisation that started off as the Wellington Community Interpreting Service, training people from the Refugee and Migrant Centre to be professional interpreters. Very important, significant thing, first step for people into the workforce very often, and a crucial thing for communications for those new migrants and refugees, rather than using amateur volunteer people to interpret for them. Then I headed off to Samoa, and luckily I was able to pursue my interest in the NGO world not only by working with Rotary there, but also with the Samoa Cancer Society, which I helped build up and establish during that time away of about 3 years. And back in New Zealand from the beginning of this year, I've joined Presbyterian Support New Zealand as their National Executive Officer, contributing to a change management process that's going on there. And as I said, this move into the NGO world has been quite a rewarding one in terms of job satisfaction and the chance to have a sense of making a difference. One thing I'd like to leave with you in that way, if you're in any situation of advising people on prospect of an NGO career, is the great advantage of some government experience that you can bring to bear on that. Knowing how government works from the inside is really invaluable when you're working on the outside. Of course that applies in a number of business environments as well. But I observed a lot of people baffled by the intricacies of government, and even to the extent of maybe, we could even say, having the wool pulled over their eyes a little bit by those in consultation processes where an NGO person didn't actually know the realities of how the system actually works. So just to wrap up with a little glimpse into what it's like being in a Rotary Club in a developing country. I thought it might be useful, since we do a lot of work internationally, to have that sense of how it works when you're in a Rotary Club, as I was in Apia Rotary. Nick and I both joined, and my sense was very much of being at the centre of an hourglass. So you've got all those very helpful Rotary clubs around the world, particularly Australia, New Zealand, and to some extent the United States, all looking at possibilities. How can we help the country you're in? And you had the hourglass of the small group of about 20 Rotarians in Apia Rotary, and then the huge demand out there in the country itself. And there was that little funnel for those that work to pass through. Really striking. My enduring memory of that group is how dedicated they were, how generous with their time, and how really hard-working. So I personally got deeply involved in the literacy and education aspects of Apia Rotary's work. I became a board member and particularly helped establish some awards at the university foundation year level, working with Rotary Club of Pencarrow and some others in the Wellington area. And I came back and had a talk to all of you, and very kindly at that stage the international group supported with a couple of scholarships, which I would like to talk about, possibly our reinstating and continuing. The kinds of things I saw in a club like that were the huge efforts on water supply, disaster relief, but the commitment to a small group of 20 or so people who could turn their hands to finding a truck when it was needed, finding enough boys, as they were called, guys who could help with the heavy lifting, people who would go down to the wharves and spend hours and hours negotiating to get things loaded off the wharves and released. That's pretty striking, as well as a lot of the fundraising efforts. Very, very great. And when you think from here of what we donate, it's great to bear in mind the demand and the special expectations that we're actually putting on clubs that we work through. I thought they were fantastic, and the huge logistic efforts that go in. It was a very invigorating time, and something that really reinforced for me the absolute spirit of service to Rotary that's lived out in reality in a club of that sort.